Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our latest meeting of the Education Subcommittee of the African American Task Force. My name is Medina Wilson-Anton, and I co-chair the subcommittee with Representative Sheree Moore. Unfortunately, Representative Moore is not feeling well today, and so I'll be filling in for her usual role in chairing the meetings this evening. As you all know, this evening we're joined by two esteemed guest presenters who are going to talk to us about teacher diversity. But before we get into that part of the agenda, we're going to start with our roll call. And Caitlin, if you could call the roll so we can check for attendance and make sure we have a quorum, and then we'll deal with the minutes and then get into the presentation.
Absolutely. I will go in the order that is listed on the slides. Representative Moore, Representative Wilson-Anton, Christine Aloyes.
Present.
Tiffany Savage. Kyrie Bay. Simone Philpotts. Gloria Ho. Gloria, are you able to unmute? Okay, we'll circle back. I do see that her name is on the list of attendees. Amanda Holman.
Present.
Leslie Footman. Jamie Bailey.
Present.
Dr. Dania Woods.
Present.
Stephanie Ingram. Krista Davis.
Present.
Eric Anderson. Jermaine Solomon.
Present.
Dr. Sharon Pepokai.
Present.
Dr. Shelley Rouser.
Present.
Jennifer Cucci.
Present.
Monique Martin. Dr. Tasia McCove.
Present.
Dr. Michael Harp. Charito Calvachi Mateco.
Present.
And I'm going to circle back to Gloria. Gloria Ho, are you with us? I'm not sure if she's having a tech issue, but I just heard another ping, and I believe Kyrie Bay has joined us. Kyrie, are you with us?
Yes, I'm traveling at the moment, though, but I am.
Okay. Well, thank you. You just made it in time for attendance. Thank you for being here. And Madam Chair, we do appear to have a quorum.
Great. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to accept our minutes from the last meeting.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say Gloria Ho, I just called her. She couldn't hear, so she's logging off and logging back on.
Thank you. Are you able to hear us, Gloria? And in the meantime, is there a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes, this is Dania Woods. I make a motion that we accept the minutes from the December 16th meeting.
Is there a second?
I second. I don't know if I can because I may not have been at that meeting, but I'll second if I can.
You can. Thank you. Caitlin, can you call the roll to see if we can get these minutes approved?
Absolutely. Representative Moore, Representative Wilson-Anton.
Yes.
Christine Aloyes.
Yes.
Tiffany Savage is not here. Kyrie Bay.
Here.
Simone Philpotts, I don't think she's with us. Gloria Ho. I think she's still popping back on. Amanda Holman.
Yes.
Jamie Bailey.
Yes.
Thank you, Jamie. Dr. Dania Woods.
Yes.
Krista Davis,
Yes.
Jermaine Solomon,
Yes, I'm sorry.
Dr. Pepakai,
Yes.
Dr. Rouser,
Yes.
Jenny Forcucci,
Yes.
Monique Martin,
Yes.
Dr. Tasia McCove,
Yes.
and Charito Kawachi Mateko.
Yes.
Okay. It appears we have enough yes votes. The minutes are approved.
Thank you. Thank you all. All right, so now we can get to the more interesting part of our agenda for the evening. At this point, I'm going to pass over the mic and I think the screen sharing capabilities to Mr. Sheree Mikey, who is a former principal and teacher and the founder of the Center for Black Educator Development. And after his presentation, then we'll hear from Dr. Taryn Fletcher, who's a best-selling author, culturally responsive teaching expert, and the founder and CEO of Truly POC Incorporated. And I think each of them will present for about 20 minutes, and we will have time for question and answer from the committee after their presentations.
Thank you. Is it okay for me to start sharing? Because I know it'll cut off your host. Okay, great. Well, first of all, good evening. Again, I'm Sheree Mikey. Really glad to be here and share just what we've learned as a collective, as well as what I've been able to experience as an individual educator for almost 30 years at this point. We started the Center for Black Educator Development really to address and rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline. And, as you know, for many reasons, there's a lack of Black educators. Some of them through the very mechanisms that we celebrate, like the 1954 Brown versus Board decision, and many other, policies that ended up thwarting Black people leading classrooms and schools, et cetera. Myself, I was on my way to law school, and it was a Black educator, Dr. Martin Ryder, who was in the school district of Philadelphia, and told me, like, oh, I see your activism, I see all the the work that you want to do in your community and the leadership. And something they struck me that he told me was that the purest form of activism was teaching Black children well. And that really resonated with me, and that led to me becoming a teacher and a principal for 26 years. And we launched the center in 2019. And he also helped us, me and other, we weren't even career changers yet. Many of us were right out of college. But the idea that educational justice and racial justice were always combined and could never be separated, and pursuit of one automatically involve the other if we were doing it well. So as many of you know, I'm sure, in your past conversations, that and every obviously state and district is a little bit different, but just on the national landscape, it's been mainly a white middle-class profession. I can tell you back in 2014, when I was supporting Black men in education, ended up being 17 of us. We started an organization called the Fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice. And what we recognized that not a single one of us, 17 Black men from all around the country, were all in Philadelphia working, but none of us had been approached in high school or college to become an educator. And we realized that after we were speaking, not a single one of us. We were all invited into the profession after we graduated college. We did our first kind of survey, and we asked our colleagues. Most of them were white women, and the average response was third grade, was when someone tapped them on the shoulder, was when they remembered someone engaging them in a conversation about them leading a classroom and how important it was and how great they would be. So third grade for one demographic group and post-bac for another. And so one of the things that we just started really recognizing that it's not just who's leading the classroom, but it's also who's preparing those who lead the classroom. It's the curriculum writers and purchasers and approvers. It is the policymakers, It is the instructional coaches. There are a whole lot of folks in the ecosystem that do not necessarily understand, come from, address, and then sometimes, unfortunately, even respect the culture of Black and Brown children. And so we recognize that it's not just leaving the classroom, it shapes the entire experience of our students. And so our mission is really to address the recruitment and the training and the hiring and retention of quality educators that either reflect the cultural background of the students or at least share and understand and respect the common social political interests of the students that they serve. So either, and all of them have to have the right mindset. We're not just saying more Black teachers for Blackness' sake or just to have same hue, but the mindset, skill, and will necessary is what we spend all our time working on. So one, increasing the number of effective Black educators, the number of years that they remain in the profession, and then addressing the culture responsive practices at proficiency level of all educators, and then obviously advocating for policies that support and advance educational justice. And so we have, at the Center for Black Educator Development, we have 4 main ways of doing it. Obviously advocating for public policies, but also developing this culturally informed pedagogy, innovating professional learning, because as we mentioned, we provide professional development for in partnerships with universities, with districts, et cetera. And then strengthening the pathways to teaching, which for us means starting much, much earlier. So as part of like this, this idea is one, just understanding the learning that take place. We believe that the best educators have the mindset, the skill, and the will necessary to become an effective educator. This is an example as a Black-led, Black-founded organization. This is how we center our work. Here are our values, and you can see this things from educational justice, things that, outcomes matter, coming and partnering with the idea of servant leadership and Black excellence. And what does that mean? What does that feel like? To be able to serve righteously and be able to have a racial identity that's positive. And these aren't just for us as a staff. This is what we want to instill in our future educators. And that we've all heard about the burnout and et cetera, and the conditions, the working conditions that undermine retention rates of educators, and particularly educators of color. And so how do we sustain the soul? And so part of our vision is having a national, again, Black teacher pipeline. And we really should say rebuild it, because there was once one. And the idea is to have, over the course of the next decade or so, 9,000 Black teachers across the country in different communities that are coming through our program that I'll talk a little bit about here. So our program starts early. So we've learned that, many Black educators are spoken to after they graduate college, where they don't have college and career opportunities that may expose them to teaching. And so we start by raising money and to be able to pay students to explore teaching. So imagine a paid teacher apprenticeship for high school students, as well as college students. But high school students have a couple opportunities for early exposure, as well as clinical experiences. So there are teacher academies that we partner with, where districts we partner with to implement teacher academies, where students are able to take, imagine an elective course, Teaching 101, but from a Black pedagogical framework and a Black historical lens. We know that many teacher prep programs are based on white educational theorists, white behavior theorists, white child psychologists, and they are often, unfortunately, wholly ignorant, outside of HBCUs. I'm glad to see Dr. Rouser here, outside of HBCUs where they're being taught about Dewey, B.F. Skinner, Piaget, Horace Mann, and then they're saying that is going to be what we use to prepare mostly white women to come in and teach a diverse group of students. And what we build our curriculum around is, how have Black people looked at education, even when it was illegal to be taught in this country? What traditions from the African continent that may have been strained because of the Middle Passage, but not broken? And so how was education looked at, and how can that be recentered in the development of teachers? And so partnering with universities for dual enrollment, the curriculum of the Count Cato to Black Educator Hall of Famers is the curriculum that we use in this teacher academy model. And then Freedom Schools Literacy Academy that we're doing after school as well as in the summer. Students who are able to go through this program, we're also raising money separately for this Future Black Educator Scholarship and Black Teacher Pipeline Fellowship that we're in partnership with United Negro College Fund. So students who go through Freedom Schools or the Teacher Academy, which is we call Liberation Academy, they're eligible to apply for a fellowship where they would have, and we're partnering with those cities, they would have 4 years of last dollar scholarships that we're working with UNCF to help them match with others. So hopefully they can graduate college, totally free. But then they also have 4 years of retention bonuses, meaning every year that they teach in that city that we're partnering with, they get a retention bonus up to $20,000 over the course of those 4 years. That's independent of any collective bargaining agreement that they, that's in their contract. This is from their work with us to go through this training and development program. And then in college, they have a fellowship. And then I would just say the other parts of it is our pipeline, our Black Teacher Pipeline, we believe is 12 years long. High school support and exposure, college support and exposure, and then supporting in the first 4 years of teaching. And to us, that's the Black Teacher Pipeline. Oh, sorry, I went backwards. So I'll end there and pass the mic, stop sharing. And thank you. Thank you for your attention and engagement.
Thank you. So do we want to do questions now while it's fresh before we go over to Dr. Fletcher? Is that agreeable to the subcommittee? I saw a lot of nodding during the presentation. I learned something. I think I might be one of the only non-educators, right, who's part of the subcommittee. So this was helpful information. Do we have any questions or comments from subcommittee members before we go to the next presentation? And I think Mr. Mikey's joining us for that as well, right? So if you have a question that comes to you after, we can ask it after as well. I don't see any raised hands. So at this point, I think we'll go with Dr. Fletcher. If you want to go ahead and share your presentation.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mikey, it's a pleasure to serve on a panel with you. Thank you for your presentation. Well, I'll start by sharing a little bit of who I am. I think when we think about all of the work that I know your committee is doing alongside with the equity teams for the Department of Education, is that we're really looking at how we retain educators of color who enter our school systems, particularly here in the state of Delaware. And I was one who actually entered the Delaware school systems. I was taught here in Delaware as well. But my journey is short-lived in Delaware because I actually was able to gain my leadership skills in the state of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So I was not one that could be retained in the state of Delaware. And I think that serves as coming back to talk about this work and to do this work alongside Delaware educators is a unique lens that I have, because I left the state because I didn't see that I could become a leader here and do the work that I was so passionate about doing. I come from a long line of educators and learned really quickly how to play school, learned really fast how to play school. Because school was set up for quiet, reticent girls, and I was not quiet nor reticent. In fact, I loved more than anything to share with other people, share stories, share ideas, and collaborate. I was doing that very young, but I learned very early that teachers most enjoyed quiet students. And so I learned how to play school and become quiet. That impacted my life for many years to come, because when I had the opportunity to become a principal, I made sure that I tried to keep center how it felt for me to be a student and how I wanted it to feel for other people's children. That led to me having the opportunity most recently to serve as the deputy superintendent for Camden City School District, where the entire mission was about revitalizing the community through our school systems. But two was the same challenge that Mr. Mikey talked about, and the challenge that I continue to talk about and to support, which is our teachers are not prepared to fully support our students as they come. And so fortunately, through my experiences, I learned that I too was making some of the very mistakes that made school not so exciting and not so enjoyable for me. And when I learned the mistakes that I was making, which I was trained to make, must be very clear, I was trained to make a lot of these mistakes, such as heavily supervising young people with control, creating teachers creating lessons that were culturally blind and disconnected to the communities that we serve. I had some of these very challenges in my building. And I'm not afraid to talk about them, because when you know better, you do better. And so that's the work that's ahead. Today, when I get a chance to talk with teachers, I'm sometimes in a room with over 500 teachers at a time, and this is still happening even on Zoom. And when I ask them, are you feeling prepared to support young people? Do you feel like your teacher preparation program really allowed you to know how to engage your students? And almost every time they say, no, I'm struggling with that. And so I'll say, well, perhaps, maybe as an educator, you're looking to become a leader and you recognize these glaring inequities in your building, and it literally keeps you up at night. But is the concern that you can't implement culturally relevant pedagogy, and what's in your way? Do you need coaching? Do you need action steps? Why aren't we focused on creating environments that accept every student that comes into our building, particularly our Black and Brown students? And they're constantly telling me that, yep, that's me. I don't have the skill set. I'm not prepared. I'm not ready. Yet here I am in front of our students. Even when there's diversity champions, people that don't have to be convinced that there is a need for culturally responsive teaching, and they're in this role to support other teachers, they feel inequipped. They're not ready. They don't know how to expand the work beyond the 2 to 3 staff members that often show up for these action plans, or that often show up to spearhead these events around diversity and equity. And quite frankly, Mr. Mikey talked about the issue. I mean, we have 80% of our teaching staff are white middle-class females, yet 51% of our public school population are students of color. And all school types are struggling with this, in that they have an increased number of communities of color entering their buildings, but there's a cultural mismatch. And what the research shows is that the key to student achievement are teachers understanding the cultural differences that our students have between the teacher and the student, recognizing those cultural differences, bringing new cultural experiences into the classroom that are congruent with the students that they are serving, dissolving the disconnect, and empowering all students inside of the classroom to achieve more. And we know that these achievement gaps in African American and Latinx students, they persist. And why do they persist? They persist because of the juxtaposition between the teaching force and who is in the seats in our classrooms. And unfortunately, what further convolutes the achievement gap is that our current school systems are predominantly white. They're characterized by predominantly white middle-class norms. And that can be very confusing for young people. They don't quite understand why school is someplace they're mandated to go, but it doesn't feel like the place that they belong. So the transformation is necessary within our school cultures and within our training. We cannot dismiss that the cultural congruence is necessary. And it does not mean that every teacher has to be of color. In fact, I'm sure we've all had experiences where someone who looked like us didn't necessarily give us the respect that we deserved or didn't see us as valuable. So it's not necessarily that it's only about color, but recognizing that culture is also community. And when we're thinking about the benefits of cultural congruence, we know that there's more advanced critical thinking when cultural congruence lives inside of a classroom. We know that there's an enhanced ability to adopt multiple perspectives and to see the world through multiple lenses when we have cultural congruence. There's higher academic achievement, higher college acceptance rates, more cross-racial friendships. And there's over 50 years of research to support that when you have a classroom where students of color have equal status in the classroom to their peers, we know that that creates stronger academic achievement inside of that room. So the work that I do is about creating aligned support for schools. Truly POC offers high touch support to help educators apply an equity lens to not just their building of bicultural fluency, but also to the instructional pedagogy, the teaching and learning experiences, while also transforming school and community culture at the school level, at the systems level. We also help schools identify internal and external shifts that are necessary to develop their self-awareness and build bicultural fluency. And in order to truly implement those shifts, the high touch support is necessary because it's not just about creating the system and building the practices, but it's also about building the teaching force that can implement the strategies. And we're still working with our teaching population. They're still here. So we can't just wipe them out and move on with a new crop of people. We have to support the ones that are currently working in our school systems while we're further developing a stronger pipeline. So our work is also about clarifying the vision and designing foundational systems that will help advance racial equity inside of schools and ultimately cultivate the next generation of diverse leaders. And so what I know about educators, given the experiences I've had, is that when there's clear expectations that are presented, similarly to the clarity that's presented in the Delaware regulation for diversity, Regulation 220, or the clear expectations that are set within our instructional standards, when there is clear expectations, coupled with high-level support for our leaders and our teachers, we then see that implementation with fidelity is possible. But it takes that two-prong approach. It takes the high level support, and it also takes the clarity in the regulations. And I know that's the work that this committee does, to really define what are those expectations? What are we looking for schools to do? But just giving the regulation doesn't change much. What's necessary is the support. And oftentimes schools, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the support. Ultimately, no matter what school type we're talking about, and I work with charter schools, I work with private schools, I work with public schools, and all school types across the country, they need to give schools a cultural reboot. We just need to rethink it all and build stronger foundational systems that prioritize not just awareness, but activation for advancing these systems and advancing equity. And no matter where we are, all of us are in the business of education so that we can help young people navigate the next generation, so we can build the next generation of leaders and help them navigate a complex society like our own. For me, being a mother of Black children, having a child with Down syndrome, it's highly important that when my children go to school, they see themselves reflected in their learning. That learning is culturally relevant, it's racially affirming, it's socially meaningful. And whether you're teaching white students, Black students, Latinx students, transgender students, non-binary students, students with disabilities, a student with Down syndrome, we're charged to prepare the leaders of tomorrow to respond to our futures and global multicultural needs. So every learner in every school really benefits from a school program that is focused on designing high quality, culturally responsive, community focused schools. I will end there and pause for questions.
Thank you very much. And Caitlin asked me to remind both of our panelists if you could send over your slides so she can share that with subcommittee members. We really appreciate it. I'll open it up again to questions from the subcommittee. I have a couple, but I'd love for an educator maybe to jump in first. I see Shelly's hand is raised. I want to go to Shelly first.
Sure. Thank you very much to both of you for your presentations. Shelly Rouser at Delaware State University. I'm the education chair. And I'm really curious. This is something actually that my team has been talking about quite a bit. The systems work that districts have to do. So when we talk about, and our group will be presenting next on recommendations about increasing educator diversity in Delaware schools. So one of the things I think about as I was hearing both of you speak is the fact that the miseducation is an accumulation of so many years. So I know that the work that we have to do is going to require, yes, a change in our higher education programs, while simultaneously creating a change in what students are learning, even unconsciously in K-12 about about non-culturally responsive instruction. So what you experience as a student carrying through has to be undone when they come into the higher education system before we can then undo and then push out culturally responsive teachers. But when you have experienced the inequities and the non-culturally responsive experiences, I'm thinking about the twofold work, the work that we have to do in our institution and the work that we need to do to support the K-12 system and creating a place where you, Dr. Fletcher, would stay in the system. So I'm wondering, my question is, what does training look like? Do you do training with districts around the systems that it takes to plant those seeds? in the K-12 system and to also keep teachers in the system. And if you could tell us a little bit about it, what it looks like to do that right. Because when we put out recommendations about having more diverse educators, what's in my head is not just some large scale recruitment effort, but recommendations that we'll have around systems changes that will not only just pull people and gravitate them to the system, but create systems when we convince them that teaching, the education is a field for them, that will actually give them a healthy working environment that they'll enjoy for years to come. So what does it look like when a system gets into that work? And do you have some experiences along those lines you could share with us? Sorry for the long question.
So I'll jump in because I actually cannot see if Sheree was ready to jump in. My apologies. So to answer your question, and just going to make sure I restate it, what does it look like to work with leaders on the system level work while simultaneously training teachers to rethink the systems that they are currently using in their classrooms, and while working on recruitment efforts? And so for the work that I do with leaders, it really starts on being clear about the foundation that's necessary in order to try and do any of it. So the recruitment effort is important, but what you find is my experience. I was excited, I was eager, but I couldn't stay because I didn't see that this was a place that I belonged. I didn't necessarily see that I was able to continue my career journey. And that was because the cultural experience inside the school, the norms, the policies, the practices, the unstated rules, they still lived even though they were able to recruit me, right? So the systems level work is about being clear about the plan forward that is going to actually rethink some of those norms and those policies, those practices, those unstated rules. For a long time, Delaware was kind of known as the good old boy network, right? And so that no one ever plastered that on any campaign. That was never in a newspaper. That wasn't something you could read, but that was an unstated rule that you just knew. And uncovering those ideas, bringing them to the forefront is part of the work. So to get more granular, it's about creating an equity plan, a plan of action with actual strategy behind it, with teams and committees that will be responsible for implementing. It's also about training teachers to implement practices and having a plan behind those practices to ensure teacher practice is changing. So it's the instructional goals, but then it's also the plan and the evaluation tools that you use to ensure that when you're inside classrooms, you see those practices taking shape. My work has a lot of done for you support. So the teacher training, I'm not asking for teachers to learn cultural responsiveness and then teach it to another teacher. I'm not asking for leaders to do that. That is not, I think that's often why the work doesn't get done. They have to learn it themselves and then teach it to other people, right? So the experts come in and support. That's what that high level touch looks like. It's also about creating a community where you can come and get your needs met almost on demand. So creating that community space where they can work alongside of other leaders from other school systems and get ideas and kind of troubleshoot things in real time. It's also support writing the plan, giving feedback on the plan, thinking through action steps. And so it's very high touch when working with me, but it can very much look differently in other ways, in other spaces.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, excuse me. And I would agree with, Dr. Fletcher, as far as like the the system of support necessary and like how things are actually internalized. Too often, as you know, Dr. Rouser, there's training, but it happens in that space. It doesn't really translate to how educators plan unit maps, lesson plans, how they interact with students in the moment, as intellectuals doing deeply emotional work, how to tap into, I went to a PD before. So we really have been, partly using the Kirkpatrick evaluation model that talks about not just the reaction, the degree to which the training is relevant to the participants' work, but really the results to the degree which behaviors are sustained, and those targeted outcomes are achieved, right? And so there's a continuum there in trying to land as much as possible. And as Dr. Fletcher mentioned, that connection between the professional development and the practice and coaching that has to dovetail with it. Most educators around the country are going to PDs that's separate from coaching and mentorship and that community of practice that she described. And then lastly, I would say that, a big part of it, I was glad that you mentioned simultaneously, right? Because if we've seen, all around the country, we see principals and school leaders, district leaders like, oh yeah, teachers need to go do this. And we're just like, all right, are y'all coming as well? Or, and they're like, no, the teachers need to. We're like, okay, that's one strategy. But the principals can fit in most auditoriums, Philly's huge. It's 180 principals in the school district of Philadelphia. If we can't get that right, but you're talking about the 12,000 teachers and staff, there's a disconnect there, and I used to say the same thing when I was at the Department of Ed with Secretary Arnie Duncan and John King. Like, if we can't get 100,000 principals on point, culturally proficient and responsive to teachers and staff needs, but we're constantly in the news saying what we're going to do for the 3 million plus teachers. Again, there's a disconnect, disconnect there. So we also use this, there's a continuum, cultural destructiveness all the way on one side, all the way to cultural proficiency on the other, and helping people navigate that, but also be in community, right? So cultural destructiveness, eventually the culture of blindness, pre-competence, then cultural competence, but that's just saying, oh yeah, I accept differences. The actual proficiency is where it goes into, now I'm able to serve, various cultural groups.
Thank you very much. This has been my whole day, from meetings to meetings. I mean, it's our life, but it's interesting how this day is coming together. We just hired a program manager for recruitment and retention of diverse educators at DSU, and I'm excited to talk with you all further about the work that not only he will be leading, but the department will be rallied around. And I want to talk to you about some work we're gonna be doing in May. Thank you for your time.
Looking forward to that, and hopefully, we put out. You may have seen it with Teach Plus, a recent report around teacher retention, about what 100 Black teachers from around the country have shared, which dovetails with a educator retention toolkit. That's also on our site. That's open source as well. So hopefully it's of some use.
Thank you. So we have two hands now. We'll go to Kyrie first and then to Monique.
Good evening, Kyrie Bay at Colonial School District. Please forgive the name. We should be past those type of names. But anyway, I am a middle school health teacher that now teaches mindfulness, and I am also now teaching Teacher Academy as a pilot program in middle school. And the very things that you are speaking of are the very big obstacles that we deal with every day. I actually am now reading the Drawbridge, which is about power and privilege, and having that debate with my 8th and 7th graders who are now in the Teacher Academy, and want to know how I can get some support and resources from you, because again, we are middle school kids. You're speaking on how this movement can actually be implemented and become not just something that we give to them, but something they can maintain and actually create their own path because our youth are our greatest resource. And a lot of the things that you're saying, and I don't want you to also stop at principals, because when I've been teacher of the year for my district, so I get a chance to speak. And when I do speak, I speak on not just admin. If our district heads, if our superintendent, if our school board aren't at these type of meetings, and I sit in these meetings nonstop. And one of the things I'm an old jarhead. I was in the Marine Corps 30 years ago. And I know if I've been through boot camp, these PDs, these anti-racist trainings, these equity, diversity, and inclusion, I want to see all stakeholders there, not just admin. I want to see school board members. I want to see parents. If you really want to have a school to community communication, then we really have to put everyone there, and also with the student voice. So if we have students who actually outnumber the teachers in these places, but have no true say in it, they're just told, hey, follow these directions, but have no say in it, we would actually get more of them to be part of this. And you would also have them go, that's a teacher that had my attention and influenced me in a positive way. I might want to do that. So until we start really creating that all around, not just stopping at admin, and also reaching out to some of these other entities that are now have heard the voice, have heard the call, and are now doing it. And I think districts also have to recognize when they do have leaders within their building and not stifle them. And that's part of the retention problem. But my question is, what is the resources that you are offering to high school? And I hope you can offer it now to these different pilot programs that are doing student academy, teacher academy in middle school, and giving students voice even down to elementary.
Yeah, I would say most of our curriculum is right now written for high school. We have been having conversations about middle school. I think a lot of time is going to be up to, educators also just determining, okay, what part of this curriculum is usable for middle school students. We're mainly focusing right now on high school and college students, so ninth all the way through, recent graduates. And the clinical experience, we use the Freedom School model, Freedom School Literacy Academy model, and they teach first, second, and third graders. So right now it's our program touches elementary, high school, and college. However, happy to, connect with you and share the resources and see if it's something that can be differentiated or adapted, for middle school students.
Thank you. And I love your work.
Thank you. And 100% agree with you. I'm sure Dr. Fletcher does as well around the ecosystem. Yes, it's not just teachers. That's what comes out of people's, the front of their thinking. Oh, the teacher this, teacher that. But it's an ecosystem, all the way from who prepared them to be in front of other people's children, but then also the entire ecosystem. When Dr. Rouser was talking about training development and how do we get students, I'm like, hey, instructional coaches need to be there too, right? So if they're seeing something, they're just not ignoring it or just oblivious to it. They're picking up on because if they're developed in their cultural competencies as well.
Yes, and with the work that Truly POC does, we start at the executive level of leadership with coaching. We actually do not start with teacher development, because most of that teacher development is about awareness, and we're beyond awareness. We're at action. So we start with the executive levels of leadership to ensure that when we get to the teacher development piece, that they have the systems ready to actually begin the implementation process. Because again, like I said, I think we're mostly aware. What we need to take that awareness to is into action and implementation. And that's the work that Truly POC does.
Thank you. Applied knowledge is true power.
Thank you. Monique, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I do. I want to thank you both first and foremost for, taking the time to not only present to us, but to also answer questions. I will say, as soon as we began, I was so inspired, and it's hard to inspire me, but when Sharif began and he began using language that was so liberating. However, depending on who you are, the language can, I don't want to, well, it can be profound for people who don't live and breathe this revolutionary work in education. And so the liberating language just, it lit me up inside. But my question is, with the multiple layers and levels of resistance in both of your worlds and what you're doing, how do you respond? How do you navigate? How do you persist? And to be honest, I want to know how you buck the levels of resistance. Like, that's the real question. And, there's a quote that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so when I think about the state of Delaware and transforming the culture and listening to the prior questions, we know it'll take a village. I mean, it's not just educators, community members, but our families and caregivers, they're part of that community as well, and our students, so engaging and learning for everyone is necessary so that our village does not burn. So how do you ensure and maintain the fidelity of your truth with so many levels of resistance? And the reason I'm asking this question is because prior to this particular meeting, my group members, Jamie and Danielle, we were meeting, and Jamie, shared information with us, and we were speaking about it. And there's a bill being sponsored by 5 Republicans here in Delaware to amend Title 14 education. And so we were trying to figure out, what the intentions of the bill, what it was, and it was introduced January 6th, and no one seems to know much about it. And these are the things, the policies that happen. And it's kind of like we don't realize they're happening until after the fact. And I just think about the country with the 400 plus voter suppression bills. And so what would you recommend for educators when they are faced with all of those levels of resistance?
Well, I'll begin. I mean, the resistance is real, but it's necessary. The resistance is real, but the work is necessary. And what I try to do, what my approach is often, is that I take leaders and teachers back, all the way back post-Civil War, because they often feel like this is something new. And actually, the roots to culturally responsive teaching live post-Civil War. So if it could be done with the most limiting resources possible, right? There was no internet. We have no TikTok videos. We have very little resources educating enslaved people, right? Recently enslaved people with tons of trauma. They were able to create environments where their students felt brave, they felt courageous, they were able to see themselves as strong people. And before long, that was what schools looked like for many people of color, Black people. And then when that caught wind, that's when you saw Black schoolhouses burn down because they were actually successful. And so I try to take folks back to the beginning. And then I think when I talk with teachers, because I mean, there's so many ways that the pushbacks happen. You have parents pushing back, you have leaders, you have teachers. And so when you think about how to get them to best respond to the resistance, or if you confront them about the resistance, I think it's about changing experiences, providing new experiences so behaviors can change. Oftentimes we go and just try to fix the behaviors, but really you need to change people's experiences of how the work looks before you can really start to change the behavior. And so the approach for Truly POC is through a 9-step framework. We talk about attracting the right people into our schools. We talk about supporting them and what does support look like for each individual teacher that we serve. And we use truth. We use truth. I mean, and this work is about everybody. It's about everybody. Sometimes I work with predominantly white schools, predominantly white teacher staff, and maybe less than 30% students of color. So oftentimes the bottom line hasn't changed for them. You know, school is still school, whether we talk about this or not, because it doesn't necessarily always affect their everyday lives. But when we talk about what the work is, which is cultivating the next generation of responsive leaders who can support multicultural needs, everybody needs it. White students need it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that, and I appreciate you, lifting up a lot of the anti-CRT or anti-truth movement. That's, and you just recognize it's not new. It's in the news now, but it goes way back as as Dr. Fletcher mentioned. I think part of it is really assessing, and I think it's a place by place, strategy, right? Who comes into the profession, that's one thing, and that's why we spend so much time with how we develop our youth and helping them really understand that educational and racial justice, as well as this purest form of activism, which recruited me as a 21-year-old and hooked me from the beginning. Talk about what lights up your soul, right? And so I've been running with that ever since then, in addition to how I experienced education as a young child attending a freedom school, that was full time. And I would say it also, I think sometimes we have to help educators. It really depends on the context that they're in. Sometimes they're going to have to separate the job from the work. The work is making sure that students are whole and fulfilled and et cetera, but there are a lot of different ways that can happen. Depending on where folks are and what the backlash, but I think it's a constant, teaching is activism. So is protecting teaching and education and learning. That's also, a form of activism. We spoke to a group who's, in a very, very red place. And we talked about community, right? It's a difference between schooling and learning, schooling and education, right? Schooling and a sense of purpose. And if they're blocking in spaces inside the school, and again, this is job versus work, what are the community centers that can do some of the teaching as partnerships, right? Because we can't always assume that, kids only learn inside of these walls. Nah, a kid never stops learning from a child to adult. So how do we make sure that we are protecting the intellectual minds, right? And so, a lot of people think about, we just had Dr. King's birthday, one of the things that people don't realize he talked about was hey, I'm all about integration, but when you're talking about schools, we have to protect their minds and not turn them over to people who don't think that they are full human beings, right? And so, it's how we work in public spaces is one thing. Black child's brain, so protecting the intellectual development and the positive racial identity of a child, that's something that's powerful, and that means resisting whatever it is that people are speaking about and thinking okay, is this going to damage the child? And then I would say lastly, after George Floyd was murdered, Minneapolis public school system reached out to us, and they were mostly white educators, right? And they're like, hey, students are going to come back, but just as importantly, so are the educators who never thought about race, class, power, privilege, and how that, comes about in their lesson plans. And one of the things that we talk to them about is, every lesson plan is a political document, and every time you teach, it's a political act. If you're choosing to remain silent about something, that's a political act too. And so helping educators make decisions that sometimes pushes back against the narrative that's outside, because that's actually what education is supposed to be about.
Yeah, thank you both for responding. And I just want to say, I agree with everything that you said. I wonder about the power structures, because when I think about the transients with educators of color and linguistically diverse educators and male educators within the state of Delaware, and not necessarily just Delaware, that's reflected nationally. However, the hostile environments seem to persist because there is a lack of cultural proficiency, at a minimum, cultural competence in our school communities. And many people in power have yet to actually do their jobs, because this is inclusive of their jobs. And so people begin to fear, and rightfully so, because their careers and livelihoods can be destroyed. So that's just one area that I'm always trying to strategize and be very calculating to protect educators who are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So thank you for sharing.
That protection, and again, it goes so outside of schools, that the power structure, who's in power, informing the community about, like, they may hear one thing, oh yeah, anti-racism, but here's how it plays out in your child's classroom. Here's what it may do to their positive racial identity and their development as a full human being. So all of that, I think we have to keep making sure that we're continuing to inform and helping people decipher some of the complexities that they may just hear in passing.
Thank you. Great question. Great conversation even that we're having. So it looks like the next question is from Charito, if you wanted to ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate all this enlightenment with questions and with answers. I always worry, though, when we talk about very innovative in education, that sometimes we are still inside of a box where, for economic reasons, there is just too many students for one teacher. So we want to change the system, but that doesn't change. In so many students with different trauma every day are supposed to stand up, go out, come back, etc. When that is, we should not expect of a child, because each one is different and is living a different experience. Because school is like the centers to foster democracy. So how is that child that is obeying and being indoctrinated is going to come up? But the other thing is that I don't see, first of all, I'm not an educator, so I come from outside, okay? I may mess up the language and whatever, try to understand me from there, because I'm not using, what you are being taught, the parameters of language. But for example, for me, there is no nature in these innovative things that usually we talk about. There is no nature, no connection to nature. It's not intentional thing of how we can put this child in connection with nature in a big intentional way. That is so important. So for example, I am talking because my little niece, she is going to preschool in a forest. And she's always, when she is with us, coming with Tia, this is a different leaf. oh, look at different, because that is her classroom, even in winter. So that's what I'm having in my mind. Now there is models, and you may know those things, but how that could be a radical change, a review of the culture. Well, that's what you're saying with that. And without this type of thing, I don't think we're gonna help a student to really build the capacity to create something from the ground up. There was always be given from the top. And you talked, Dr. Fletcher, about new experiences, the importance of a new experience, because that's where they get the knowledge, something that is different. And I think that's what is so important, to have a structure of dialogues that are already, very implementing circles, peacemaking circles, for example, for the students to be able to speak up, find their voice. And I wanted to ask, both of you, how do you see that kind of innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think two things. One, when we center, students in their and in a just system, and again, when you're talking about like racial justice and educational justice, racial justice, it can't be separated from environmental justice, right? So it's not just overcrowding in the classroom. Those type of conditions often happen to marginalized communities, right? These are combined institutions that were never structured to think of, hey, how do we make sure that Black and brown people and poor white, and poor white folks have the best kind of conditions. These institutions weren't built on that. Often these are skyscrapers that are on the foundations of inequity. And then we add some window curtains on the 50th floor of this skyscraper and say, hey, these are our equity, window dressings, ignoring the foundation and the height of the skyscraper, right? But hey, look at the equity window dressing. So all of that is combined. You're talking about being able to learn in a forest in these different spaces. We're so far removed from that in most places where we're trying to get rid of the lead paint and the asbestos and the vermin. Let alone thinking about, what's the most conducive and inspiring space. Many of Philadelphia schools, they said the people that built them was the same firm that built mental health institutions. And it doesn't look like they changed their model. It was just like, that's capitalism. Oh, you do that? Oh, build this too, even though it's for kids, right? And so thinking about all things, I think one way to mitigate some of it, a little bit of it, is to ensure that we are looking to support students in their aspirations, right? Imagine back to school nights where we're not just telling them about our policies and procedures, we're actually interviewing and listening as educators. Hey, what is your child's strengths? What are their aspirations? Imagine we have a system where they follow advisory. I visited a school that had not only advisor that continue with the child from middle school to high school, through high school, there was a team. So their report card conferences, the student they came up with a plan of their aspirations, what they wanted to do. And then they had a team of advisors that was comprised of not only their advisor and another staff member, a family member, community member, and a peer. So imagine someone's clergy who's a part of that and like, yes, I'm also invested. And the student would say, hey, I want to be a environmentalist. I want to be a scientist. Here's my plan. Because the idea is to match the education to what the child needs, right? And so that even when I was a principal, we would say, don't ask students, I would tell the staff, never ask students what they want to be when they grow up. But many of them were asking and thinking about like, oh yeah, you should go work for somebody. That was like the mindset. Instead, ask them what problems do they want to solve? What do they want to create or build? Hell, what do they want to destroy? Right? And then let's try to match the education to what they say they want. And it's a very different, framework. But yeah, I mean, you're speaking about a lot of just different things that are unjust, overcrowding, lack of time for educators to actually think and plan, analyze data well, and then just what's a natural learning condition that we can say that that's the absolute floor. And we're so far from that, throughout the country. If you're rich, you get it, but America tells children, you get the education your parents can afford. That's the American way. You get the education that your parents can afford. If you can't afford it, you get what we throw at you. And so it's extremely unfortunate and unjust.
And what I'll add to that, and just to continue the conversation, is that the practices that we see in these rich and affluent schools, they don't cost anything. It's a mindset. It's actually absolutely free to begin to incorporate some of the necessary environments for historically excluded communities. It's absolutely free to implement them. They don't necessarily take anything but a mindset shift. An example of that: why do we militarize our student hallways in Black and brown schools, and we let schools with predominantly white affluent families to just be responsible humans inside of their hallways? They grab books, they get a sip of water, they meander their hallway until it's time to go into their classroom, and they are given respect and responsibility simply as a benefit of the doubt. Yet we do something differently in schools that have mostly Black and brown students in them. And what I'll add to that is that it comes from the well-worn idea that the students in those Black and brown communities or poor communities or whatever adjective you want to say to describe them, that what the culture that they come with needs to be fixed, and it is a deficit. And so that's why it is a transformation of school and community culture, because it starts by recognizing that there is value in the capital, the cultural capital that they're bringing with them. And they are most equipped. They are the best equipped to solve any of our problems that occur in their community. They're the best to solve them. But it starts by believing that what they come with is valuable in the first place. And so when I think about bringing in the environment, I mean, that's exactly the work our students and their community is a part of that environment that needs to be invited into the very school that sits in their neighborhoods. But what we see is that the school that's sitting in their neighborhood does not replicate who they are, the cultural norms that they bring to the table, and doesn't actually value them. And so I personally, I think you can take that idea and think, okay, are you talking about just having more outside time? And I think that's one way to think about it. But I think the other way is, just recognizing that the community is valuable in itself and that it needs to be a part of the school dynamic. It needs to be a part of the system. It needs to be the foundation of the school systems need to include the community in which it's here to serve.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Both of you.
I had a couple questions. I've been typing. I don't know if you guys can tell when my eyes change, right? But I'm typing my questions, and somehow you answered a couple of them. I'll ask it anyway. And I really like the example you just shared, right? I'm struggling kind of to figure out, when you say norms, when you say the culture that's not conducive, what does that look like? So the example of the hall pass, okay, I remember that. I remember having to use the bathroom, right, in class and feeling like I didn't even have the permission to. Do you have other examples, maybe from work that you've done locally, where you had a conversation like this with, folks in the school ecosystem about how this policy maybe is not conducive to the culture of the students? And then could you maybe share some positive, I guess, like examples, right, where it was successful and where people were receptive to that?
Sure. I think many of them live in the world of discipline. So discipline looks very, very different. I mean, how you view children. So just the language that you use. In some schools that aren't valuing the community that they serve, you may hear things like this child is a danger to the environment. Where in another school setting where the culture is valued and students are given respect without actually having earned it, they are challenging. You know, it's just even the language that's used also perpetuates this idea of devaluing. The way in which in some school settings where the students are truly valued, there are no walls in their classrooms. You can learn where learning works best for you. You can sit at your desk. You can sit on the couch in the corner. You can go read outside. You can sit in the hallway. There's a lot of freedoms of choice that you have when you are in an environment where you can see yourself reflected in your school culture and the norms that are there. Whereas in another school setting, there's lots of strict parameters and there's lots of supervision because, again, it comes from the school of thought that you cannot be trusted as you are. I need to help you learn. I need to strip you of the things that you came with because they're not valuable to this community. The way in which we work has a whole nother set of rules and the ones you came with are unacceptable. So I need to fix you. I need to break you of your habits. And until I do, you won't have those freedoms. And so it's pretty obvious when you get a chance to visit many schools, but here's what we know about educators. They go into their building, they stay in their building, they stay in their classroom, they leave. So, I mean, sometimes just the collaboration of being able to see what another school setting looks like and consider why it may look so different is eye-opening. So those are some examples. If they were helpful to you, I can talk about this for a long time. So
I'm sure. No, that was very helpful, and I hope it was helpful from not just me, but I'm like the baby here, right? So I'm learning.
No.
But I'm sure you're right. I toured one school so far as a state rep, and I saw environments like you're describing, right? The positives that you're describing. But I wasn't critically thinking about how different it was from when I was in classrooms, right? Like I just was like, this is working. So I can see how, a teacher that's not in that kind of environment is like, oh, this can work. So that's really inspiring, honestly. Thanks for indulging me. And Mr. Mikey came off mute. Did you want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, I would double down on the language and how kids are viewed. It's not just kids, right? It's a lot of our educators, unfortunately, have a mindset to awfulize students and communities. It's easiest to blame them. And you can hear about this, how they talk those kids as soon as, children are othered in so many different ways. Policing, the first time I was accosted by police wasn't on the street. It was as a high school kid inside of my school. And so, when you look at the research around police officers in schools, when they're in affluent or white schools, they look at they're protecting the building, they're protecting the people inside from outside threats. When they're in Black and brown schools, they look at the children as the threat. That's a very different worldview, and that permeates, and so when we're talking about the research that shows Black children experience their teachers' racial biases as early as 3 and 4 years old, that's pre-K. And so how does a child experience that on a day-to-day basis, 180 days every year? And if they have that, not to saying every teacher does, but if they have one, what does that mean? If you have 30-something teachers across your educational career, what does that mean? And at what point does a child who decides for their own self-preservation to check out, right? Then where does the expectations go then? Goes even lower. They're already low. But then, oh, you checked out? The nerve of you to preserve your own mental sanity, my expectations for you have now plummets even further.
Well, we should have had you two answer in opposite order so we could end on a higher note. But I appreciate both your perspectives on it. I mean, that's really valuable information. We're running low on time, so we're not going to get an opportunity probably to talk about the draft resolution that was sent out. But Caitlin asked that I ask all subcommittee members to send any revisions or edits you have, and she's already received some that have been helpful. Do we have any other questions or comments for our panelists from the subcommittee? Monique, your hand is up. Is it just up from before?
It is.
Okay.
My apologies.
I just wanted to make sure I gave the opportunity. But I just want to thank you both so much for joining us this evening. This has been really informative, and we just appreciate you spending an hour and 23 minutes of your evening in what I'm sure was a busy day with us. So thank you so much. And thank you to all the subcommittee members for engaging, asking great questions, and sharing your comments as well.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Great to see you all. Take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you.